What if I told you Prince Harry may not even remember his wife or children by the end of this year? In a stunning and heartbreaking revelation, Prince Harry has reportedly been diagnosed with a rare and aggressive brain condition, one that doctors say is rapidly erasing his memory. Insiders describe terrifying moments where Harry forgets names, places, even his own daughter. Meghan, devastated, is said to have broken down after whispering, "He no longer remembers our daughter's name." In today's report, we dive deep into the emergency medical briefings, the palace's silent panic, and what this shocking development means for Harry, his legacy, and the future of the royal family. Stay with us, because this story changes everything. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Have you ever watched someone you love fade away before your eyes? Not physically, but mentally. Like a slow-motion unraveling of everything they once were? That, according to deeply unsettling reports emerging from both Montecito and select palace insiders, is exactly what's happening to Prince Harry. Once the bold, spirited, outspoken second son of King Charles and Princess Diana, he is now said to be facing a silent and merciless adversary, his own deteriorating mind. This story does not begin in a hospital room. It begins in a moment of eerie stillness. One early morning in May, long before the California sun began to warm the red-tiled roofs of Montecito, Meghan Markle reportedly found Harry sitting at the edge of their bed, staring blankly at the floor. She greeted him softly. No reply. She asked again, "Harry?" But he didn't look up. When she placed her hand on his shoulder, he turned to her with an expression that could only be described as foreign. "I'm sorry," he said. "Do I know you?" She thought he was joking. He wasn't. That single moment, according to one close friend who later relayed the exchange in hushed tones, was the first undeniable crack in a foundation that had been quietly weakening for months. Whispers had already circulated about Harry forgetting things, losing his place mid-sentence, misplacing items, even confusing timelines from his own life. But this was different. This was not forgetfulness. This was fear, raw and unfiltered. The kind of fear that clutches at your ribs and refuses to let go. Later that week, Meghan reportedly made an emergency appointment at a private neurological center in Santa Barbara, accompanied by 2 bodyguards and a royal protection liaison. The doctor, one of the leading neurocognitive specialists in California, conducted a series of rapid memory tests. Short-term recall, object association, time and place orientation. And then, in a move said to have left Meghan trembling, he called for full neurological imaging. The results, according to 2 medical insiders and 1 member of Harry's extended advisory team, were devastating. Prince Harry is allegedly suffering from a rare, degenerative neurological condition, one that attacks short-term memory first and progressively eats away at identity, relationships, and ultimately, selfhood. The medical report, if true, described it as trauma-accelerated neurodegeneration, a devastating diagnosis exacerbated by decades of emotional strain, unresolved PTSD, and continued psychological stress in the public eye. It is important to understand what this means. We're not just talking about forgetfulness. We're talking about a systematic disintegration of memory, facial recognition, emotional connectivity. This is the kind of illness that, left unchecked, could render Harry incapable of recognizing his own children, unable to recall his wedding day, incapable of remembering the face of his mother. Now imagine being the woman who has to witness this descent in real time. According to one unnamed source from inside Meghan's media circle, she broke down sobbing. Not because of what this would do to their image, not because of the headlines she feared, but because Harry looked her straight in the eyes and called her Diana. The confusion, reportedly, was consistent with a form of cognitive disorientation triggered by high-stress environments. In that moment, all PR strategies, all global branding efforts, all ambitions for charitable empires and Netflix deals collapsed. For weeks after that moment, the couple allegedly went dark. No public appearances, no Instagram posts, no press releases. And Meghan, a woman known for tightly controlling narratives and image, reportedly withdrew even from her own inner circle. According to a member of her former podcast team, something changed. She wasn't returning calls. She canceled meetings. There was this silence. Inside the royal network, things were no better. When word reached the palace, the reaction was reportedly a mix of disbelief, horror, and guilt. Guilt, because some close to Charles began to wonder, had they misread the signs? Had they ignored cries for help over the years that were not just emotional, but neurological? One aide allegedly said, "We thought he was lashing out. Maybe he was slowly falling apart." King Charles, upon hearing the alleged details of Harry's diagnosis, is said to have canceled his appointments for the entire day. A private medical briefing was held between the king's own physicians and neurological consultants. Their objective, to verify the condition, understand the risks, and prepare contingencies in the event that Harry's health became a public crisis. In one particularly gut-wrenching report, the king reportedly whispered, "I can't lose another." But this isn't just a private tragedy. It's a public reckoning. Because Prince Harry is no ordinary patient. He is a global figure, a living symbol of legacy, royalty, and controversy. And his unraveling mind represents more than personal grief. It symbolizes a collapse of generational history, of the modern royal era struggling to evolve. This is where the story turns darker. There are now rumors that Meghan is attempting to shield the children from the truth. That Archie and Lilibet are being kept away when Harry's episodes become too disorienting. That Meghan is consulting with legal advisors about power of attorney over Harry's estate and intellectual property. Because once memory loss escalates past a certain point, consent becomes legally impossible. The palace is reportedly divided. Some urge silence, arguing that making Harry's condition public could endanger his dignity, while others argue that the public has a right to know. After all, this is a man who once stood before global audiences advocating for mental health, resilience, and transparency. What irony, then, that his own most harrowing mental battle might be hidden from the very causes he championed. And still, at the center of it all, there is Harry, a man who, if sources are correct, is dimly aware of his fading clarity. In one particularly heartbreaking recounting from a Montecito staff member, Harry allegedly asked, "What happens when I don't know my kids anymore? Do I just disappear?" That question, lingering like smoke over a battlefield, is what brings us here. Not for scandal, not for spectacle, but for a deeper understanding of what it means to lose someone not to death, but to erasure, to stand by and watch as their mind slowly retreats into a fog that no medicine can lift. It's not just tragic, it's terrifying. And so, this video is not just an expose, it's a reckoning. Over the next few chapters, we will uncover what really happened inside those closed doors in California. We'll examine the doctor's warnings, Meghan's emotional breakdowns, the palace's response, and what Harry's condition could mean for the future of the royal family, and for the world's most watched marriage. By the end, you may not look at Harry the same way ever again. And perhaps, neither will he. The sun hadn't yet risen when the car rolled up to the discreet side entrance of the private clinic nestled in the hills of Santa Barbara. No flashing lights, no paparazzi. Just tinted windows, tight security, and silence thick enough to suffocate. Inside that vehicle was a woman who once stood before global microphones with dazzling poise, now reportedly gripped by a fear she couldn't shake. Meghan Markle sat beside Prince Harry, who, according to insider accounts, looked vacant, pale, distant. He wasn't speaking much, said a source with indirect knowledge of that morning. He kept asking what day it was. And then, a few minutes later, he'd ask again. The staff at the clinic had been briefed hours before their arrival. A VIP patient. No names. Maximum discretion. But even under confidentiality protocols, one attending nurse later whispered to a friend, "When I saw his face, I knew this was no simple checkup. Something was deeply wrong." The initial appointment was scheduled for 45 minutes. It reportedly lasted over 4 hours. Harry, described as cooperative but visibly disoriented, was given a battery of cognitive tests. These included immediate and delayed recall, spatial awareness, logic patterning, and linguistic fluency, standard assessments used in early detection of neurodegenerative diseases. Doctors often refer to these as the invisible tests, because while outwardly simple, they can reveal the hidden decay in brain functions that were once taken for granted. He was asked to name current world leaders. He struggled, said one anonymous medical source. He was shown a sequence of numbers and couldn't repeat them in reverse. But the most alarming moment came when he was asked to draw a clock. The clock drawing test is a widely recognized tool in neurology. Patients are asked to draw the face of a clock reading a specific time, say 10 past 11. It assesses spatial planning, motor function, and memory retrieval. What Harry allegedly drew, according to someone who saw the results, looked like a child's scribble. The numbers were jumbled, and the hands were pointing in opposite directions. The medical team was stunned. Prince Harry, former soldier, trained helicopter pilot, and global public figure, could not accurately recall how to draw a simple clock. For Meghan, this was reportedly the moment everything changed. Her hands were shaking, said the same source. You could see her trying to stay composed, but her eyes kept darting toward Harry like she was watching someone vanish in front of her. After the tests, Harry was taken for a comprehensive MRI and PET scan, machines that map brain activity and look for anomalies in neural patterns. While the full results remain private, two individuals familiar with the process confirmed the findings were not promising. There were, reportedly, clear signs of atrophy in the hippocampus, the area of the brain responsible for memory formation and retrieval. In healthy individuals, this region is rich with neuronal activity. In Harry's scan, it appeared reduced, faded. The working diagnosis, quietly shared among a handful of trusted medical and legal professionals, was what one neurologist referred to as a progressive cognitive impairment with probable neurodegenerative markers. In plain terms, Harry's brain was slowly shutting down key memory functions. And the progression rate, they warned, was aggressive. It was no longer a matter of if he would lose his memory, it was a matter of when. The doctor, a highly respected specialist with experience treating traumatic brain injuries in veterans, reportedly delivered the news to Meghan with brutal honesty. He may not remember your face in a few months, he said, according to one account, and within a year, he may not remember his own. She sat in silence, hand pressed to her chest, tears forming but not falling. For all her public strength, polished speeches, and carefully curated image, this moment stripped everything away. This was not a headline she could spin, not a controversy she could reframe. This was raw, inescapable, real. That evening, Harry and Meghan returned home to Montecito. But everything had changed. The estate was quiet. Staff were told not to speak unless spoken to. The usual laughter from the children's playroom was muted. The kitchen, normally bustling with energy, was still. According to a close family friend, it was like the house itself had stopped breathing. Later that night, after the children were asleep, Meghan reportedly poured herself a glass of wine and sat beside Harry on the back patio. "Do you know where we are?" she asked him, testing gently. He looked around, paused, then smiled. "England?" She didn't correct him. She simply sat beside him, staring into the dark horizon, her mind reeling with the weight of what the future might now hold. But behind that heavy emotional veil, the wheels of protocol and protection had already begun to turn. The next morning, Meghan allegedly contacted a team of attorneys. Not for damage control, but for preparation. Questions had to be asked. What happens if Harry loses his ability to make legal decisions? What if he forgets passwords, contract details, business responsibilities? Who holds power of attorney? How do they navigate guardianship over their shared projects and properties? By midday, Meghan's legal and medical teams had reportedly crafted a comprehensive emergency plan, documents to grant her full authority over all of Harry's legal and financial dealings, should his condition decline. It was not about control, insiders insist, it was about survival, preservation of their assets, their children's security, and Harry's public image. But things became more complicated when a member of the Sussex inner circle leaked a partial summary of the doctor's findings to a former royal aide, who then escalated the matter to the palace. What followed was chaos cloaked in silence. King Charles, upon hearing the details, reportedly demanded a full briefing from both UK and US medical consultants. "I want to know what we're dealing with," he allegedly told his advisors. "This is no longer about privacy, it's about legacy." Private transcripts of those calls suggest the palace was torn. On one hand, the king understood the need to protect Harry's dignity. On the other, he feared the monarchy's reputation might suffer if the truth leaked unfiltered to the press. The solution? A crisis protocol was drafted. If news of Harry's condition broke prematurely, the palace would frame it as a temporary medical leave, citing stress, not cognitive decay. Behind the scenes, however, senior royals began preparing for something far more severe, the mental disappearance of one of their own. Meanwhile, in Montecito, Harry's condition reportedly worsened. During a dinner with two close friends, he allegedly forgot where he was mid-sentence and asked what month it was 3 times. At a children's event in Los Angeles, he was seen staring blankly at a group of kids playing in front of him. One observer recalled, "It was like he wasn't there." His eyes were open, but he wasn't present. In one particularly jarring incident, recounted by a former employee, Harry stood in the hallway of their home looking at a family portrait. He pointed at Archie and asked, "Who's that little guy?" The staff member didn't respond. Megan, reportedly overhearing, gently took his hand and led him away. The diagnosis had shifted from a fear to a fact. Behind the scenes, Megan began quietly assembling a new team of caregivers, medical experts, and support professionals. The residence was outfitted with memory aids, labels on doors, voice reminders, digital interfaces to help Harry recognize familiar faces. According to one source, Megan even recorded bedtime stories and affirmations in case Harry began to forget her voice. The diagnosis wasn't just real, it was shaping their lives minute by minute. But the question still remained, how long could they keep this hidden? The human mind is an intricate, beautiful labyrinth. When functioning well, it retains everything from the mundane to the magical: grocery lists, the sound of your child's first cry, the way the sunlight looked the day you said, "I do." But when it begins to break down, the very things that make us who we are begin to fade like chalk in the rain. And sometimes, that loss reveals itself in the most heartbreaking of ways. It was a Thursday morning in late spring when it happened, when the illusion that things could be managed completely fell apart. According to a household insider, Megan had just returned from a brief solo walk around the estate. A quiet ritual she'd taken up since Harry's diagnosis, just to breathe, reset, and brace herself. She entered the nursery, expecting a typical morning. The room was bright. Lilibet was on the floor, giggling and reaching for her wooden blocks, dressed in soft blue pajamas. Harry was sitting cross-legged next to her, softly humming a lullaby. At first glance, it seemed like a moment frozen in familial bliss. But what Megan heard next changed everything. "Come on, sweetheart," Harry said, coaxing the child to hand him a toy. "That's a good girl. What's your name again?" He asked it casually, almost playfully, but not with the knowing tone of a parent teasing a child. No, this was different. His eyes narrowed slightly, his voice lowered. He genuinely couldn't remember. Megan froze. "Lily," she said, trying to keep her voice from trembling. "Her name is Lily." Harry turned to look at her, blinking slowly, like he was searching for something behind her eyes. "Right. Yes. Lily." He smiled, but there was a hesitancy to it, like he was trying to match the name to a memory he couldn't find. Megan knelt down slowly, kissed Lily on the forehead, and scooped her up without another word. She told the nanny they wouldn't need her for the next few hours and retreated to her private quarters. And there, behind a locked door, she finally allowed herself to collapse. What had been theoretical was now painfully real. The man she married, the father of her children, had momentarily lost the thread connecting him to his own daughter. And though it had only lasted seconds, that fracture pierced her in a way nothing else ever had. Later that evening, Megan reportedly broke down during a late-night call with her mother, Doria Ragland. The call was tear-filled, halting, and overheard in fragments by two staff members posted nearby. According to one of them, Megan could be heard whispering. He didn't know who she was. He looked right at her and asked what her name was. "I don't know how to protect them from this." That was the moment, according to a source close to the family, when Megan began to accept what was unfolding, not as a phase, not as a bump in the road, but as a slow, merciless descent. Days later, during a conversation with a senior legal advisor, she reportedly confessed, "I'm not scared of the public. I'm scared of my children growing up without their father knowing who they are. Not because he left, but because his mind did." The diagnosis was now no longer an abstract concept they could dance around. It was invading their home. It was weaving itself into the daily rituals of their lives: story time, bath time, even simple breakfast conversations. Megan began documenting everything. She reportedly instructed their in-house videographer to start recording candid moments with the children and Harry, quietly and without prompting. Every smile, every story, every family interaction was now treated like a memory worth saving, because no one knew how long Harry would be able to recall them. But the emotional toll on Megan was beginning to show. While she kept up her public appearances, insiders claimed she had developed a habit of zoning out during interviews. A makeup artist who worked with her on a recent charity segment said she looked flawless on the outside, but her eyes, they were different, distant, like she was holding her breath through the whole thing. It was during this period that Megan also reportedly began keeping a private audio journal. A collection of nightly recordings, not for press or media, but for herself and the children. In one entry later leaked by someone close to her inner circle, Meghan reportedly says, "Today, he didn't recognize the story he told at our wedding. I reminded him. He laughed politely, but I could see it. He didn't remember telling it. So I told it again. I don't know how many more times I'll have to remind him of our beginning." The most chilling entry came 1 week after the Lilibet incident. Meghan's voice, barely above a whisper, says, "He woke up at 3 a.m. and asked where Archie was. I told him he was sleeping in his room. He looked confused and said, 'Who's Archie?' Then he apologized. He always apologizes." According to a therapist who later analyzed the entries, when they surfaced through a leaked transcript, these episodes are indicative of hippocampal dissociation, a condition where the brain begins misplacing or fragmenting connections between identity and emotional recognition. He may feel a certain love or warmth, the therapist said, but the labels, wife, daughter, son, become blurry. It's not a failure of affection. It's a breakdown of mental file systems. This brutal reality began impacting not just their private life, but Meghan's perception of time. Sources say she became obsessed with preserving the present. Home was transformed into a kind of memory museum, photos printed and placed strategically in every room. Audio frames that played recorded laughter from Archie. Toys and keepsakes labeled with names and dates. She even created what insiders described as a memory wall in their study, a collage of milestones, messages, and visual cues to keep Harry connected. Their wedding vows written in gold lettering. A picture of Harry holding Archie on the day he was born. A printout of a map showing where they first met in London. One royal insider commented, "It's like she was trying to glue the pieces of him back together before they drifted too far apart." Yet despite her efforts, there were more slips, more blank stares, more forgotten details. At a family brunch organized for close friends, someone asked Harry how old Lilibet was. He hesitated. Meghan jumped in quickly with the answer, "She just turned 3 last month." But those who witnessed the exchange described a silence that fell over the room like a curtain dropping on a play no one was ready to end. And in the quiet moments, Meghan reportedly began to fear something far worse than memory loss, the loss of connection. What would it mean for their marriage when Harry no longer recognized her as his wife? Would he still trust her? Would he still smile when she walked into the room? Or would she become, over time, a stranger living in his house? These fears led Meghan to take a controversial step. She reportedly began consulting with a renowned neurobehavioral therapist, someone who specializes in maintaining emotional bonds between dementia patients and their families. The therapist recommended sensory triggers, using smells, textures, and music to anchor memories. Soon, Meghan was wearing the same perfume she wore on their wedding day. She began playing the playlist from their first dance during dinner. She even recreated the exact dish they had on their engagement night. Whether it helped, no one could say for sure. But Meghan was no longer trying to reverse the condition. She was trying to preserve moments of clarity, however fleeting. What's perhaps most painful, according to those close to her, is that she feels like she's mourning someone who's still alive. "She told me once," said a friend, "that it feels like saying goodbye every day to pieces of him." She wakes up wondering which version of Harry she'll get that day. This is the cost of memory loss. Not just to the person experiencing it, but to everyone who loves them. It's a slow erasure. A quiet, relentless storm that no one sees coming until it's already inside the house. Long before the diagnosis. Long before the doctor uttered the words that would shake their world. Long before Meghan sat cradling their daughter in silent fear, there were signs. Subtle, fleeting, and easily dismissed. But now, in hindsight, every moment, every pause, every offhand remark is being re-examined under the unforgiving light of realization. Was Prince Harry crying out for help, and no one truly saw it? The first major sign the public missed appeared nearly a year before the official medical consultation. It was during a podcast interview where Harry was invited to talk about trauma, his military past, and mental health. On the surface, the conversation was insightful, even inspiring. He spoke about how therapy had saved his life, how he had learned to name his pain. But somewhere near the end, the host asked him a question most wouldn't think twice about. "Do you remember the happiest moment of your life?" Harry hesitated. Not the polite kind of pause where someone reflects before speaking, but a long, blank space where words didn't come. "That's a good question," he finally said, followed by an awkward chuckle. "It's hard to say. They all kind of blur together, don't they?" At the time, Many brushed it off as humility, perhaps even a discomfort with personal praise. But to those familiar with the early symptoms of cognitive degeneration, that pause was chilling. In cases where memory fragmentation has begun, people often struggle to access specific moments, especially emotionally rich ones. These aren't just forgotten memories. They become tangled, unreachable, and clouded. Another moment unfolded during a Netflix promotional event for the Invictus Games. Standing beside Meghan, Harry addressed a cheering crowd of veterans and supporters. But midway through his speech, he appeared to lose his place. His eyes darted to the teleprompter, then to Meghan. He mumbled a transition line. "Let's remember why we're here," then repeated it 2 more times, each time with increasing uncertainty. Meghan reportedly reached for his hand discreetly, her smile unwavering, her voice soft. "You're doing great." He nodded and powered through. But those who were watching closely noticed the shift. He seemed out of sync, one journalist wrote. Like he was repeating a script he didn't recognize. Then came the Oprah interview. The cultural moment that captured the world's attention. But tucked between revelations about racism and royal protocols was something else, something far less obvious and far more telling. When Oprah asked about Archie, Harry began to answer, then paused. He's growing fast," Harry said. Then added, almost under his breath, "He's turning, what is it, love, 3 this year." That kind of slip is easy to miss. Parents forget their kids' ages all the time. But what made this moment different was the look in Meghan's eyes when she answered for him. Not amusement, not playfulness, concern. And beneath it, a flicker of something deeper. As though she knew this wasn't just a mental blip. This was something she had seen before. Behind the cameras, according to an aide who helped coordinate the interview, there was tension. Before they sat down, Meghan was checking on him constantly, asking if he felt okay, reminding him of talking points. It was like she was guiding him through a fog. There were other, quieter moments too. During a virtual summit on youth mental health, Harry addressed a group of young activists. In his opening remarks, he stumbled over the name of one of the organizations he was meant to praise. "We're grateful to the team at..." He trailed off, looked off-screen, then said, "Sorry, I've totally lost it." The moderator quickly filled in the blank, and the event moved on. But for a man known for his passion, energy, and command of public speaking, the lapse felt out of place. And it wasn't just public appearances. There were changes in behavior that friends reportedly found troubling. A close friend from his army days allegedly told a reporter, "He'd call me, and sometimes just forget what he called for. He'd laugh it off, but it kept happening. Once he called me twice in the same day with the same story, like it was the first time." Another acquaintance who once shared a charity board with Harry recalled a dinner in New York. "He asked me about a project we did together, something we both worked on for months. But when I brought up details, it was like he had no memory of it. None. I thought maybe he was distracted. But now, I wonder if it was more than that." In the royal family's inner circles, staff began to notice patterns. Aides reported that Harry was relying more heavily on written notes, even for small meetings. He would keep his phone open with names and bullet points, something he never used to do. "It's like he was afraid of getting lost in the middle of a thought," one former staffer said. You could see the anxiety in his eyes when someone went off script. Then there were reports of sudden mood shifts. During a charity retreat in Aspen, Harry was seen pacing alone late at night, muttering to himself. One witness claimed he appeared agitated, even frightened. "He looked like he was arguing with someone who wasn't there," the guest said. But no one was near him. Sleep disturbances, emotional disorientation, memory lapses on their own, these could be attributed to stress. But together, they paint a portrait of a man slowly slipping away from himself. And yet, somehow, most of the world missed it. Why? Because we were all too busy watching the drama. The headlines were focused on rifts, betrayals, Netflix contracts, Spotify failures, media wars. No one paused to ask, could there be something deeper going on? Could this man, once mocked for oversharing or criticized for fleeing royal duty, have been fighting a silent battle all along? The tragedy is that even when someone is in the spotlight, their pain can remain invisible. Prince Harry was in front of cameras, on covers, in courtrooms, on stages. Yet no one truly saw the tremors in his behavior. And those who did, perhaps dismissed them as stress, or awkwardness, or PR missteps. Only now, after the diagnosis, does the puzzle begin to make sense. His strange silences, his misplaced names, His emotional vacillations. They weren't acts. They were signals. Red flags waving in a storm of flashing bulbs and noise. And perhaps the most haunting moment of all happened not on camera, but at home. According to a friend who visited the Sussex residence early this year, there was a moment during breakfast when Harry excused himself mid-meal, walked into another room, and didn't return for nearly an hour. Meghan eventually found him standing in the hallway, staring at a painting of Diana that hung outside their bedroom. When she asked if he was okay, he reportedly said, "I was just trying to remember her face." The painting, detailed and lifelike, stared back. Behind the closed doors of a Montecito medical center, something extraordinary occurred. Something so private, so unnerving, and so layered in consequence that its ripple effect reached not just across the estate, but across an ocean, into the deepest chambers of Buckingham Palace. It started with an envelope. A sealed, confidential file hand-delivered to the Sussex legal team in late April. Inside was the full neurological assessment report on Prince Harry, complete with PET scan images, behavioral evaluations, and clinical notes. The cover sheet carried a stark warning typed in bold capital letters. Urgent. Cognitive decline. Requires immediate care planning. The document was protected under California patient privacy laws, yet according to individuals close to the situation, it quickly became a document of international interest. Not just because of what it contained, but because of who it could potentially affect. The report was sobering. The lead physician's conclusion, according to one medical insider, stated that Prince Harry's condition was consistent with early-onset neurodegeneration accelerated by complex trauma-related neurological stress. In short, a rare brain condition that was worsening due to years of unresolved psychological damage. What alarmed Meghan most, reportedly, was a section titled Progression Forecast. It outlined expected changes in memory, reasoning, behavior, and emotional regulation over the next 6 to 12 months. A key line allegedly read, "Spousal non-recognition highly probable within 8 to 10 months based on current cognitive trajectory." Another section referred to event-triggered regressions, warning that high-pressure environments, such as court proceedings, public interviews, or media controversies, could exacerbate disorientation or memory blackouts. Meghan read through the report once, then again. By the third reading, she was in tears. It was clear. Her husband was not just sick. He was slipping away. Her first move was to lock down access. No digital copies. No email forwarding. Only 3 individuals were granted permission to hold the document physically: Meghan, her legal advisor, and the attending neurologist. But according to a Montecito staff member, even within that controlled circle, there were breaches. "Someone talked," the staffers said. It wasn't a full leak, but it was enough. Within 48 hours, whispers began circulating in select media and diplomatic circles that Prince Harry had received a serious medical diagnosis. Nothing concrete, nothing on the record, but just enough to trigger what would become a chain reaction of royal proportions. Back in London, a senior aide to King Charles reportedly received an encrypted message from a trusted source in California. The contents were brief: Harry, medical condition. Memory loss. Progressive. Prepare for response. Charles was said to be attending a quiet meeting at Clarence House when he received the message. Those present described his reaction as stunned silence. His face dropped, one source said. He looked like he'd been punched in the chest. That evening, a private call was placed to a discreet medical board affiliated with the royal household. They were asked to quietly review any and all documents pertaining to hereditary cognitive decline within the royal lineage. Not because they doubted the California report, but because they feared it might be part of a longer, darker thread. By morning, palace legal teams were mobilized. A private meeting was arranged between senior advisors, Charles, and a royal liaison tasked with monitoring developments in California. Meghan was contacted through back channels and asked to disclose the full medical file in the interest of family welfare. She refused. According to a royal biographer with direct knowledge of the exchange, Meghan's response was swift and unflinching. "This is a private medical matter. If the palace wants updates, they can ask Harry directly, while he still remembers who they are." That response reportedly sent shockwaves through the firm. One senior official allegedly told colleagues, "She's drawing battle lines. She wants control of the narrative, and she's using his condition to lock us out." The implication was clear. If Harry's mind was deteriorating, control over his image, estate, and public role would soon default to Meghan. And if the royal family wasn't careful, they could lose what little influence they had over his legacy altogether. Inside the palace, a contingency plan was quietly drafted. In the event that Harry became publicly incapacitated, a formal statement would be prepared citing sustained neurological challenges. The palace's tone, according to early drafts, was to be one of compassion, positioning themselves as supportive, yet distant, not due to cruelty, but to avoid implication in past traumas that might have contributed to his decline. Privately, however, there was panic, because hidden in the medical file was another buried detail, a note from the neurologist suggesting that some of Harry's symptoms may have been evident years earlier, possibly as early as 2016, during his final years as a working royal. A time when he was publicly lashing out, breaking protocol, and, most notably, stepping down from royal duties. This posed a dangerous question. Had the signs been missed or ignored? Some in the palace feared that the public, once aware of the diagnosis, might look back on Harry's behavior through a different lens. That the explosive Oprah interview, the Netflix documentaries, even the book Spare, might all be reinterpreted not as defiance, but as confusion, disorientation, or cries for help. If the press starts re-evaluating those moments as symptoms rather than scandals, one insider warned, the royal family could look dangerously negligent. To prevent that, a small circle of PR advisors was allegedly summoned to Windsor for a classified briefing. Their mission: prepare a public relations strategy in case the story broke. Suggested messaging included themes of compassion, hope, and family unity, while avoiding any admission of previous medical oversight. Meanwhile, back in California, Meghan was taking her own precautions. According to insiders, she began consulting a digital security firm to ensure that no parts of Harry's medical file could be accessed or leaked online. Phone calls between Montecito and Harry's former UK medical contacts were reportedly traced, blocked, and rerouted through legal channels. Additionally, Meghan initiated the creation of a formal medical trust, an entity designed to manage decisions related to Harry's treatment, medication, and care staff. This move effectively placed her in complete control of his health trajectory, legally and logistically. For some, this was seen as protective. For others, especially within the palace, it was viewed as isolation. Harry's entire world is now inside Meghan's gates, said one former aide. The doctors, the lawyers, the staff, they all answer to her. And if she doesn't want the palace involved, they won't be. This strategy was tested when a special envoy from the king, an old friend of both brothers, flew to Los Angeles in an attempt to meet with Harry directly. The request was made under the pretense of a social call, but Meghan allegedly declined. Harry isn't receiving visitors, she said. Not now. Not in his state. The envoy returned to London empty-handed. But by then, the secret had already begun leaking through the cracks. A tabloid in Spain published a speculative piece titled, El Príncipe Perdido, La Memoria de Harry en Peligro. The story hinted at cognitive decline, referencing vague sources close to Montecito. Although it was quickly dismissed by UK outlets, the palace knew the clock was ticking. The medical truth could not stay hidden forever. And so, the royal family began preparing for the unthinkable. Internal briefings were updated. Legal teams reviewed succession logistics in the unlikely event Harry's condition disqualified him from certain royal privileges or responsibilities. Quiet discussions were held with broadcasters and press allies to prepare sensitive tributes in case the truth came to light in the worst possible way, through a viral video, a leaked voicemail, or an unplanned outburst during a public event. But the biggest fear wasn't public embarrassment. It was personal loss. As King Charles reportedly told his closest advisor during a private walk in Balmoral, I keep thinking, what if the last time I spoke to my son as my son has already happened? What if I didn't know it was goodbye? And that fear, that quiet, unspeakable dread, hung over every room in every palace as they waited, helpless, watching a story unfold thousands of miles away that none of them could control. The official stance of Buckingham Palace has always been calm, composed, and unshakably firm, even under pressure. But nothing in recent royal memory had prepared them for this. Not the Megxit scandal, not the Oprah interview, not even Diana's death could fully parallel the emotional devastation quietly building behind palace walls. Because this time, it wasn't a public betrayal or a media ambush. It was something far more paralyzing. It was the irreversible loss of a son. And not to death, but to time, to memory, to the slow-burning extinguishment of a once vibrant mind. The call that changed everything came in the early hours of a foggy London morning. A secure line patched directly from California, routed through legal intermediaries and protected under the strictest privacy protocols. The message, Prince Harry's condition was progressing faster than expected. King Charles was alone in his private study at Clarence House when he received the update. The message came not from Harry himself, but from Meghan's attorney, cold, clipped, professional. The tone lacked warmth, but the contents were devastating. There's a high probability he may not recognize immediate family by the year's end. Those words, according to someone present shortly after, shattered the room's silence like a dropped glass. Charles reportedly stood motionless for several seconds, the paper in his hands trembling ever so slightly. He didn't speak, didn't cry, but the air changed. Something inside him collapsed in that moment, quietly and irreparably. For a man already battling his own health concerns in private, this news was more than emotional, it was spiritual. Harry was not just his youngest son. He was the last living extension of Diana's spirit, the one who carried her fire, her rebellion, her tenderness. And now, that son, the same one who once clung to him in the shadows of Diana's funeral, was fading. According to a longtime palace aide, Charles did not eat for the rest of the day. He canceled everything, the aide revealed. No calls, no meetings. He simply walked the palace gardens alone, hours at a time. But the king was not the only one spiraling. Prince William received the news not through a formal channel, but through a guarded phone call from a family liaison. It was said to be short and clinical, too clinical. "There's been a development in your brother's health. You need to sit down." William's reaction, however, was nothing like his father's. Unlike Charles, who responded with quiet heartbreak, William erupted with disbelief. "What the hell do you mean he won't remember us?" he reportedly snapped. The liaison repeated the message, this time with added detail. William, hands clenching his phone tightly, stood still in his Windsor office for a moment before finally whispering, "Jesus Christ." The rivalry, the tension, the hurt, it all dissolved in that moment. All that was left was raw, familial devastation. The thought that the brother he had fought so bitterly with in recent years might soon look at him and see a stranger was unthinkable. That same evening, William made an unprecedented request. He asked to speak with Harry directly. Not as heirs, not as figureheads, but as brothers. But Meghan reportedly declined. Through her assistant, she relayed that Harry was not in a stable frame of mind to have such a conversation. He was having a bad day, filled with confusion and fatigue. "Maybe another time," came the message. William's reaction was immediate. "I don't care if he's confused. He needs to hear my voice." He insisted, demanded, even. But the call never went through. Later that night, William allegedly sat in his private sitting room, scrolling through old photographs of him and Harry. From childhood, from Eton, from Diana's funeral, from ski trips and army training. Laughing, pushing each other, grinning in moments the world never saw. "Was I too harsh?" he reportedly asked Kate that night. "Was I too proud to call him sooner?" Kate, ever the diplomat, didn't answer right away. Instead, she placed a hand over his and said, "You were hurt. And so was he. But none of that matters now." The next morning, William wrote Harry a letter. A real one. Not an email. Not a message passed through intermediaries. A handwritten note, filled with memories and warmth and brotherhood. It was, by all accounts, deeply personal and without formality. The note ended with one sentence underlined twice. "You are my brother. Always." The letter was flown to California by private courier. Its delivery was confirmed. But whether Harry understood it, no one truly knows. Meanwhile, Charles was quietly engaging in his own form of damage control. But it wasn't political. It was spiritual. Those close to him say he began revisiting old home videos of Harry as a boy. Watched them for hours. Clips of Harry playing with Diana. Harry chasing William around Balmoral. Harry giggling uncontrollably at a magic trick during a royal Christmas. One afternoon, during a private session with his spiritual advisor, Charles reportedly said, "I lost Diana when she was young, and now I'm losing Harry while he's still alive." The pain, so deeply rooted in his chest, manifested not in tears, but in a quiet kind of despair. A man burdened by legacy, by duty, and now by helplessness. Charles reportedly made two key decisions in the days that followed. First, he instructed his private legal team to prepare a letter affirming Harry's permanent standing in the royal lineage regardless of mental decline. A symbolic gesture, perhaps, but one meant to preserve Harry's position in the family for all time. Second, he ordered a sealed family album, filled with curated images of Harry throughout the decades, to be created and delivered to Meghan. Accompanying the album was a note, short and fatherly. For the moments he forgets, may these help bring him back to us. Sources say Meghan received it with visible emotion. She didn't speak about it publicly, but later that day, she reportedly placed the album in Harry's reading room, next to his chair, where he often sat during his more lucid moments. Behind the scenes, Charles and William held a private summit, just the two of them. No advisors, no aides, just father and son. What was discussed during those hours has not been confirmed, but those closest to them said it was the first time in years they emerged with mutual understanding. Aides observed that William, often impatient and sharp, was uncharacteristically quiet afterward, and Charles, who had been withdrawn and pained for days, seemed steadier. Perhaps in grief, they had finally found common ground. But amidst their sorrow, a deeper, more painful realization was forming. Neither of them had truly heard Harry's cries. For years, he had spoken of trauma, of mental health, of needing space, of battling ghosts. And for years, they had treated those statements as dramatic or manipulative, or simply part of the modern age's addiction to therapy culture. But what if he wasn't exaggerating? What if he was describing a brain slowly unraveling in real time? What if all the signs were there, and they simply refused to look? As Charles reportedly confessed to Camilla that evening, we didn't fail Harry as a prince. We failed him as a family. And that truth, more than any diagnosis, was the most painful of all. The world may see palaces as symbols of unity, grandeur, and duty. But behind their gilded doors are corridors filled with tension, whispered strategies, and old rivalries. None more potent than the clash of two powerhouses. On one side, Meghan Markle, now holding guardianship over the most fragile royal figure of the modern era. On the other, the firm and institution trained in containment, optics, and control. It was never going to end quietly. And it didn't. By early June, pressure was mounting. Inside the palace, a growing coalition of aides and family members had one primary demand: access. Not to gossip, not to intervene, but to be involved, to bear witness, to protect one of their own. Charles wanted medical updates. William wanted a phone call, and wanted accountability. And the courtiers wanted a plan. But all roads to Harry now passed through Meghan, and Meghan had drawn a line. The first major confrontation took place via a transatlantic video conference. Not leaked to the press, not acknowledged officially, but confirmed by multiple individuals close to the crown. Present in the call were King Charles, Prince William, the Queen Consort, and two senior palace representatives. Meghan appeared alone, poised, firm, seated in what appeared to be a private study in Montecito. "Where is Harry?" Charles asked within the first few minutes. Meghan's response was immediate and unemotional. "He's resting." William pressed, his voice reportedly tinged with urgency. "We need to speak to him. We need to see for ourselves." Meghan blinked slowly. "He's not a prisoner," she said. "He's my husband. And he is ill. Right now, the last thing he needs is to be paraded through a family interrogation." The word interrogation set the tone for the next 2 hours. The palace insisted it was a wellness check, an act of love. Meghan countered with the reality of Harry's condition: confusion, disorientation, heightened stress in unfamiliar situations. "He still has good days," she admitted. "But they're fewer now. And the bad days are profound." Camilla spoke softly, trying to calm the atmosphere. "We're not trying to undermine you, Meghan. We just want to help." But Meghan had heard these words before many times. During her pregnancy, after the wedding, after the tabloid wars. And each time, help came with a cost: silence, compliance, submission. Not again. With quiet defiance, she leaned forward and asked, "Help or control?" There was a pause. No one answered. What followed, according to someone with knowledge of the exchange, was a deeply personal confrontation between Meghan and Charles. The king, with uncharacteristic vulnerability, admitted his fears. "He's my son. I want to hear his voice before he forgets mine." Meghan's reply was not cruel, but it was firm. "Then you should have called more often, when he could still remember without trying." Silence again. For Charles, the words cut deep not just because of their sting, but because of their truth. It was no secret that communication between him and Harry had waned over the years. Phone calls became strained. Messages were filtered through aides. Attempts at reconciliation were often drowned by public distractions. And now, just as he realized the urgency to connect, time was running out. William, growing more emotional by the minute, tried to appeal to Meghan directly. I don't care about the press. I don't care about the cameras. I just want to sit beside my brother again. Please, don't shut us out. According to two sources, Meghan's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't break. You had years, she said. Years to fight for him. Years to listen. Now you want to rush to his bedside because he might forget your name? That's not love. That's guilt. The conversation ended without resolution. Meghan ended the call, leaving the palace with more questions than answers. That night, a document was drafted behind closed doors, a formal request from the royal family for Meghan to allow a private envoy to visit Montecito. No media, no aides. Just one of Harry's family members, preferably William, to spend 48 hours with him. The document was reviewed by lawyers, approved by Charles, and quietly delivered to Meghan's legal team. Her response was swift and resolute. Harry is not mentally incapacitated under California law. Until and unless that changes, no forced visits, no legal demands, and no sudden drop-ins will be entertained. It wasn't just a refusal. It was a shot across the bow. A clear message. I am in control now. Back in London, reactions were mixed, and was reportedly furious. He's not a monarch, but he's still blood, she snapped during a private discussion. We don't need permission to visit our own. Camilla was more tempered. Let's not turn this into war, she advised. Let's find a door she's willing to open, not one we have to kick down. But for William, the personal pain was turning into anger. It's like she's building a wall, he confided to a longtime friend. And behind that wall is my brother, slipping away. But Meghan wasn't building a wall out of spite. According to those closest to her, she was building a barrier out of necessity. In private, she had grown increasingly protective, some say obsessively so. She reportedly vetted every nurse who entered their home, required non-disclosure agreements from all care staff, and declined all calls from UK press outlets. Even some of her Hollywood contacts had been shut out. She doesn't trust anyone now, said a former business associate. Not the firm, not the media, not even most of her friends. And behind that fortress, she was doing everything she could to preserve what little remained of the man she married. One staff member recounted a day when Harry, confused and agitated, began referring to Meghan as the other lady. Rather than panic, Meghan simply held his hand, smiled, and said, "Then let's start over, shall we?" Another source shared a moment where Harry forgot they had children. Meghan calmly took out a photo album, flipped to a picture of Archie, and said, "This is your son. You made him laugh like this every single day." She was not just a wife anymore. She was his guide through the fog. But the firm didn't see that, or didn't want to. In their eyes, she was hoarding access, hoarding control. In hers, she was the last line of defense between Harry and a world that had already failed him. And so, the standoff continued. Behind palace windows, aides strategized, lawyers whispered, royals brooded. And in Montecito, a woman sat beside a man who sometimes no longer knew who she was, and still loved him anyway. As Prince Harry's health crisis deepened and the royal household grappled with how to respond, a new question began to emerge behind the scenes, one that cut deeper than diplomatic strain or family politics. Could this tragedy have been inevitable? Was Prince Harry simply the latest in a long, hidden line of royal figures silently battling the same enemy? Cognitive decline masked by protocol, privilege, and centuries of image control. It began quietly, as most dangerous questions do. Following Harry's medical assessment in California, a confidential memo was prepared by his attending neurologist. And it was a simple yet urgent recommendation that family medical history on both the maternal and paternal sides be reviewed for any possible genetic precursors. The recommendation was sent to Meghan's legal team, who then forwarded it, reluctantly, to the palace through a secure legal channel. The request wasn't accusatory, it was clinical. But within the walls of Buckingham Palace, it was seen as something else entirely. They saw it as a veiled accusation, one insider admitted, as if the American doctors were implying that the crown had hidden something, some hereditary truth. But the reality, as it would turn out, was far more unsettling. The first to respond was the royal medical advisor, a private physician who had served the monarchy for over 20 years. While the immediate family had no documented cases of diagnosed cognitive diseases, the physician noted that historically, the royal family had a long-standing practice of concealing medical vulnerabilities, especially those related to mental and neurological health. In past generations, memory issues, behavioral disorders, even episodes of disassociation were chalked up to eccentricity, he reportedly said. But today, with modern diagnostics, those quirks might indicate much more. The royal archivist was discreetly contacted and asked to pull health records, letters, and reports dating back at least 5 generations. What emerged from that deep vault of family lore was a startling patchwork of evidence, fragmented but increasingly difficult to ignore. Queen Victoria's daughter, Princess Alice, was documented in private letters as having episodes of mental confusion and frequent memory lapses. Edward VIII, the king who abdicated the throne, was once described in court journals as suffering from intermittent periods of mental fatigue, marked by disconnection and lapses in awareness. While these notes were never formally classified as neurological conditions, modern specialists reviewing them now speculate they could reflect early cognitive deterioration or stress-induced neurological trauma. Then came the Spencer lineage, Harry's maternal side. It was here that the findings became most compelling. Lady Sarah McCorquodale, Diana's sister, had reportedly mentioned in a little-known 2011 interview that memory loss ran in the family, particularly among male relatives. She offered no detail, and the quote was buried in a lifestyle feature, long forgotten. But now, it's being unearthed with new relevance. Even more curious were the private letters of Frances Shand Kidd, Diana's mother. Some of her handwritten notes, preserved in a storage facility in Althorpe and reviewed only once by a biographer in the early 2000s, described her father as struggling to remember names and places before the age of 60. One letter, dated 1972, reads, "He wandered the estate for hours last night, asking for his mother, who died years ago. We are all concerned, but no one speaks of it publicly." Could Harry be carrying a hidden inheritance of neurological fragility? Modern geneticists say yes, it's possible. In a consultation conducted by a California-based genomics lab, hired quietly by Meghan's team to explore familial predispositions, experts noted that Harry's symptoms could be linked to a rare but inheritable condition affecting memory and emotional regulation. While the specific disorder remains unnamed due to privacy constraints, the language in the report described it as potentially latent across generations, triggered by intense psychological trauma or long-term emotional instability. In layman's terms, the gene may lie dormant, only activated under sustained mental stress. This theory offered chilling clarity. If true, it would mean that Harry's childhood trauma, the loss of Diana, the media frenzy, the isolation, didn't just wound him emotionally. It may have physically awakened a disease already coded in his DNA. And it wasn't just theoretical. A recent analysis conducted under anonymous conditions compared Harry's neurological scans with those of individuals suffering from a similar genetic condition. The patterns were almost identical: distinct atrophy in specific regions of the hippocampus, delayed neural responses during memory recall, and fragmentation in visual recognition areas. "If we didn't know this was Prince Harry," one of the specialists reportedly said, "we diagnosed this patient as someone entering stage 2 neurocognitive decline with high susceptibility to accelerated degeneration." The implications were staggering, because now the question wasn't just, what is happening to Harry? It was, why wasn't this caught sooner? And perhaps more disturbingly, did anyone in the royal family already know? That last question stirred fresh debate. Some staff believe the firm had inklings long before Harry's move to California. Subtle, internal notes marked for internal wellness review had reportedly been added to staff observations after Harry's last few months as a working royal. An assistant once flagged Harry's repeated failure to remember itinerary details. A royal press officer noted his inconsistent memory of names during public walkabouts. None of it was considered serious enough to act on. But looking back, it's impossible not to see a pattern. And Meghan, according to insiders, has begun to believe this may have been the most devastating oversight of all. In a confidential conversation with a medical advisor, leaked by someone inside her legal team, Meghan is reported to have said, "If this was genetic, if this was known, then why didn't anyone warn us? Why didn't anyone prepare him?" But the royal family had a different concern. What if this discovery became public? What if, in addition to dealing with the collapse of Harry's memory, they now had to face headlines that accused the monarchy of hiding a hereditary disorder? This could destabilize the image of the bloodline. One senior advisor reportedly warned Charles, "We're not talking about one prince. We're talking about generations." This triggered a quiet directive from the palace, bury any records that suggest a pattern. Archive all references to past mental or cognitive impairments under sensitive materials. And if asked, publicly maintain that Prince Harry's condition is unique and unrelated to any known family history. But there's one problem with that strategy. Meghan knows the truth, and she's been keeping records. According to sources close to her, Meghan has compiled a detailed dossier, collected from medical consultations, family research, DNA reports, and expert analysis. Not for revenge, not for leverage, but for protection, because she believes if the story ever turns on her, if the world begins to accuse her of isolating Harry or weaponizing his illness, she will need evidence. Evidence that the royal system had long buried its most troubling genetic inheritance. Evidence that Harry was not just a victim of fate, but of silence. This section of the story is perhaps the most painful, because it reveals that beyond the diagnosis, beyond the headlines, beyond the fear of forgetting, there was a chance someone could have known. Someone could have seen this coming. But no one looked. Or worse, they looked away.